Thank you for joining the ISG Smart Talk, how to maintain business continuity as providers shift to a remote workforce. This ISG Smart Talk is being recorded, and the replay will be available to share with your colleagues at the same link as the live event you're listening to now. Feel free to submit a question at any time during the presentation by using the Ask a Question box on the left side of your window. If we don't get to your question during the webinar, or if you're listening to a recording of this broadcast, we'll answer your questions in a follow-up email. With that, I will hand things off to Stanton Jones to kick off today's ISG Smart Talk.
Thanks, Jillian, and hi, everyone. My name is Stanton Jones, and I'll be your host for our webinar today. So today, I'm joined by two of my colleagues, David Mitchell. David is an ISG director, and Brian Thompson, and Brian is a partner in our CPG practice. So both Brian and David are actively helping their clients work through this just incredibly challenging time that we're going through right now. So they have some fantastic sort of real-time insights and advice for us today. So before we jump into the discussion, let me reinforce a couple of quick things I said last week. First, we want to thank you. Thank you so much for investing an hour of your time with us today. We know firsthand how busy you are right now. And we also know that the coming weeks and months are going to be a huge challenge for all of us and for the entire industry as we try to balance taking care of our families and our neighbors, helping our kids to learn how to learn from home rather than at school, all while staying laser focused on helping our clients and customers at a time when they need us most. But all that said, we are incredibly confident that we're going to get through this together and that we're going to come out stronger in the end. So like we did last week, we're going to be basing our discussion today around 5 actions we believe you should be deploying today in response to the pandemic. So this week, we're going to focus specifically on the implications of the countrywide shutdown in India. So as most of you are probably well aware at this point, India went into a 21-day lockdown on Tuesday to slow down the spread of COVID-19. And this is forcing tens of thousands of folks in the IT and business services industry to now work from home, which then creates a number of cascading implications that we're going to talk about today. So we're going to start with Brian, and he's going to walk us through our recommendations around allowing your service provider to work from home, but at the same time, making sure that your providers are putting technologies and controls in place to ensure your data is protected as work from home ramps up. And then Brian will give us some guidance around what to do when providers ask to relax data breach clauses, given the dramatic changes in working conditions that we're seeing. So then we'll turn to David, and David will talk to us about force majeure and why we believe collaborative cooperation should be your main focus right now. And then we'll wrap up with why we're recommending to get your business leaders involved right now. So without further ado, let's jump in. So I'm going to start with Brian. So Brian, talk to us about what we're seeing with our clients and our guidance around the work from home waiver.
Perfect. And thank you, Stanton. I appreciate it. Thanks for handing it off to me. So I'm going to move forward to the next slide, which is talking about the fact that India is under a full lockdown now. As Stanton mentioned, on Tuesday, they went into a 21-day lockdown, and we're already seeing providers come to our clients with certain things. And we wanted to get this in front of you so that you had an opportunity to digest it and then be able to ask questions of, people that are currently within your organization, legal counsel, and even ISG. Don't hesitate to reach out to us. So the first one is, most service providers with offshore delivery centers have already asked for work from home waivers. But what we want to talk about is what is a waiver. Now, clearly we all know what the word waiver means, but it's a voluntary renunciation of part or some rights that are in your contract. Next question is, should we grant it? Yes, you probably need to in order to be able to keep your business running. And then, am I the only one doing this? No. We are seeing clients across multiple industries agree to these waivers, but there are some things that we want to make sure that you're aware of. First and foremost, don't give up your right. A temporary waiver is absolutely acceptable. You can execute that in a number of ways. Every single one of your agreements has a change request opportunity within it. A very simple change request specifying a period of performance, which allows the provider a very short leash, and that allows them the opportunity to be able to have the leeway that they need without granting them full control, is what you're after. Why do we say it that way? The reason we do that is because what we're concerned with, and a provider would never do this maliciously, but what we're concerned with is that they're going to come in with a very broad brush that opens you up to too many possibilities. Instead, let's make this very clear, very finite. If the period of performance that gets chosen is too small, so we execute another change request and move it. It's not the end of the world. It's the right way to do it. The other thing we have to remember is that just because the provider is in a lockdown situation, and I'll put that in air quotes, they still have to provide service to you. That may sound a little bit selfish. It's not intended to. But the reality is that's what you signed up with them to do. In most cases, they have business continuity plans and disaster recovery plans. Those cover them for things like flood, typhoon, and all sorts of other natural disasters. Don't hesitate to work with them to come up with a solution and to keep them operating. What we have to remember is that, after all, this is a partnership. Many times we lose sight of this. In order for a partnership to work, just like a marriage, both parties have to participate in order to be successful. Finally, we talked about it there in question 3, are you alone? No, you're not. Nearly every provider is scrambling and or has scrambled already. And we're seeing clients being presented with waivers that we need you to be cautious about. And we're going to talk about one or two of those. For example, access through other interfaces which offer comparable security to any of the interfaces listed in the agreement. And frequently there's a table in the agreement that says they can access your environment via these mechanisms. Why could that be problematic? Well, just because it's comparable does not mean that it supplies the exact same security that you're after. So watch for that kind of clause very, very carefully. The next one we'll talk about is where required by a client, the provider will install and manage key logging systems and provide captured data to the client. Well, at the outset, that sounds wonderful, but the reality is you should not have to ask the provider to install something that needs to be installed to keep your security sound, and your security team must weigh in on those things. Don't assume that the provider has looked at every scenario that could potentially impact you. That's the key for that kind of a waiver. The other thing I want to bring to your attention is this is the time right now for you and your provider to step up to the intent of your true partnership. Neither one of you saw this coming, but you can both roll up your sleeves and you can determine the reasonable course of action that needs to be taken for you to be successful. Finally, document any temporary deviations via your agreement's change control mechanism. You want it in writing, and you want it to be memorialized within the agreement, not just via emails or simple conversations. I know all of these things are logical and sensible, but sometimes when we're in the heat of the moment, we don't think exactly the way we could or should possibly think. So we wanted to bring these things to your attention. Now,
hey, Brian,
let's look at
this is David. Could I chime in for a second?
Absolutely.
Hi, folks. This is David Mitchell, just so you know the name with the voice. I was just going to say, I mean, one thing to think about, too, when it comes to waivers is kind of look in the mirror a little bit as well, right? There may be some things that you're asking your provider to do to jump through hoops to keep your business going, that may be waivers from your actual, deliverables and obligations. So it truly is kind of back to that partnership word. It truly is everybody rolling their sleeves up, and nobody saw it coming. But how do we get through this?
Thank you, David. Appreciate that very, very much. So let's move into our next section.
Yeah, so Brian, thanks for moving the slide. So I guess now that we're kind of sort of in this phase where it's inevitable, right? They are working from home. The waivers are coming forward. Our clients are, to varying degrees, agreeing to those waivers. What are sort of some of the mitigating technology and HR-related controls that our clients should be thinking about as we make this transition?
Great segue. Thank you, Stanton. So we put three things on this slide, and it's kind of interesting when we look at what's intended and what has to happen. Think about these three areas: changes in security. What do we have to do differently now? Changes in how people work. WFH, which has become a term that we've all become very familiar with, work from home. What about the concept of work from home call centers? We have to make sure that we understand what a work from home call center really is. And then let's talk a little bit about bandwidth in that same space. And then number three, changes in policies that govern the work that's being done. So when we think about office-based working, it's no longer an option for most of us, nor for most of our clients. Most of our service providers, as well as most of our clients, can't work within the office anymore, and they've had to switch to a work from home situation. Why has this become complicated? Well, think about it. When you signed your agreement with your provider, they talked to you about an ODC, which is an offshore delivery center. That's where 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that work is getting done. Now, they can't do that. So what has to happen? They had to put in place more stringent work from home policies. They had to put in place the opportunity for people to work from home. You may have seen it in the news. The government of India actually had to put a law into place that enabled the workforce to work from home, which had only been in limited situations previously. Along with that, there's the availability of equipment. Many of these people worked in a Citrix environment that did not require that they have a laptop. Now they have to be able to work from home and need a laptop potentially. In addition to that, we heard across the board in India, broadband sticks were gone. Nobody could get access to a broadband stick to be able to work from home. Here in the United States, we're spoiled. Almost everybody can get high-speed internet into their homes. That isn't how it works across India. It isn't how it works across Mexico. It isn't how it works across all of Europe. So there are hotbeds where it works just fine, but those things have had to change. Think about just here in the U.S. Many people have gigabit connectivity into their homes. Along with that, many providers, Xfinity, Comcast, Verizon, which has Fios, AT&T, all offer differing security and enhanced security. But if you didn't have it before this struck, the likelihood is it's going to take quite some time to be able to get it brought into your home. So that's where we're encouraging you to work actively with your internal information security departments and understand what it is exactly that you're going to have to do in order to make sure that your devices are secure. In addition to that, ensure that you're using your VPN at all times if your company requires it. Don't think for just a minute, oh, it's no big deal. So I got to work with my counterpart in India, and I'll just let him log in and take care of it. Make sure that if it's a security requirement within your environment, that they're using the VPN and using it properly. Don't forget as well about personal firewalls. other things that may have to come into play in order to make sure that the environment remains secure. I'll remind everybody again, remember to encrypt all sensitive data at rest and in transit. Many companies do the former, but few do the latter, meaning a lot of people talk about sensitivity and encryption of data at rest, but few do it while it's in transit. So make sure that your organization has thought through that and what it means for you at this very time. Now, granted, most of us are not going out to coffee shops. We aren't heading to Starbucks anymore. But the reality is there's still a lot of public Wi-Fi out there. I live in Charleston, South Carolina. The weather's fantastic. If I wanted to go sit downtown on a bench where nobody else is around, I wouldn't do that today because I do not want to connect to public Wi-Fi. It's just too risky. The other thing we're encouraging our clients and all of our partners to remember is turn off the auto connect function on your Wi-Fi. Don't let anything connect to something that you're not sure of. The other thing we want to talk about in this same section is what companies have to think about to do things differently. We're not saying this to scare you, but pay attention to the location provisions that are in your agreement. Remember, data confidentiality, limits of liability, and indemnification provisions are there for your protection, and they are there for the provider's protection. Also, now is the time to review your cybersecurity insurance policies to determine if there are exclusions and exemptions or things that you have to be aware of as far as your remote workforce is concerned. Finally, data loss prevention monitoring. We don't think about that very often because it's something that we've signed up for and it just happens. But if you haven't signed up for it, talk to your data security provider, or if it's you and it's you inside your own organization, make sure you take care of that. Pay close attention to DLP. Don't leave it to chance. David, anything you want to throw in there?
No, I think you covered that quite well. I think it's kind of a theme that you're going to hear throughout the rest of the webinar is really just thinking through what's pragmatic, what's practical. Obviously you don't want to put anything at risk, but look for those areas where there might be alternatives or things that you hadn't thought about or kind of discounted as not the optimum solution yesterday might be an acceptable solution today, at least, in terms of the short-term waiver that Brian talked about before.
Exactly right.
Awesome. Thanks, David. Thanks, Brian. So, Brian,
you.
I'll stay with you on this. So, as you know, and David's seeing the same thing, we're starting to see a number of these waivers come in as we work with our clients. A number of those are also containing clauses around potentially relaxing data breach clauses and penalties. So, talk to us about what we're seeing, and then also why we think it's so important to get counsel involved in this immediately.
Absolutely, happy to. So if you look at the next slide here, it talks about relaxing or eliminating data breach clauses. So the tagline there, focus on temporary fixes, engage your counsel. We cannot drive that point home anymore if we possibly could. Think about the first one. We're looking at a 4 to 10 week horizon. Item number 2 is a 3 to a 6 month horizon. Item number 3 is 6 month plus. We broke it into those bite-sized segments for a very specific reason. The first thing you want to do is your internal counsel, if they are not familiar with your agreement or don't feel comfortable with it, please encourage them to go to the outside counsel that worked on the agreement in the initial phases. Please don't try to go it alone. Secondly, don't use side letters or email. Those things are all discoverable if, God forbid, it goes to litigation. Use the formal means of communication with your provider that are outlined in the governance sections of your agreement. Those were specifically put in there for this reason. You never want to leave something to chance. Finally, the provider is your partner. We said that early on, and we continue to say that. But you need to focus on the short-term relief for the provider, but most importantly, for you. This is about keeping your business alive and making sure that you can survive this COVID-19 pandemic. When we talk about counsel, and the reason we say counsel is critical, outside counsel that specifically works in these kinds of deal structures do this for a living. They understand it better than anybody. ISG, of course, understands your agreement if we helped you navigate it and if we helped you negotiate it. But we are not attorneys. We cannot offer you counsel. That's why you have internal and external counsel. We also ask that you not become lackadaisical about your approach to communication with the provider. I hate to say this, but I have to. And that is, if a data breach occurs, and if it goes to arbitration or litigation, we as ISG want every single one of our clients and every single one of our provider partners to be safe. We want to make sure that you've covered all your bases. And what that means to you is follow the governance solutions that were outlined in your agreement. I could probably say that 15 times a day when I talk to my clients. Obtain the guidance and best advice that you possibly can from your outside counsel. Get it in writing. Simple, clear, and easily understood change requests are by far the best approach that you could ever take to document everything. Don't rely on your memory. Your memory will fail, especially as COVID-19 goes away, the business starts to recover, and we're moving ahead at full speed. We are all going to forget what we talked about, including you and including the provider. So make sure it's fully documented. The other piece here that goes along with that tagline up there on focus on temporary fixes is determine beforehand, before you go and talk to the provider, what you can relax and how far you can relax the remedies that you allow your provider. Think about remedy as a term. When we think about home remedies, we think about honey and lemon to be able to allay your cough. We think about other things that need to be done to keep you healthy. In this case, we're talking about a remedy that can get you over this tough period. So, not all data breaches are equal. You have some leeway that you as a business may want to be able to execute with your provider. Talk about that. Walk through the different scenarios. If you have questions or concerns, again, get your counsel involved. You never want to do permanent damage to your company, but you also don't want to do permanent damage to your provider. We encourage you to work internally with your key stakeholders. David's going to talk about that a little bit more as we get further into the webinar. But don't just think of this as an IT situation. This is something that has to be focused on entirely by the business. You may choose to discuss and document with your provider some case scenarios that you want to be able to walk through. All of those things are good as long as in the end they culminate in a clear and defined change request that impacts this period of time. Relaxation in this case may be a good thing. When it comes to data breach clauses, they were put in there as ironclad The reason being, you don't want the provider to just be able to, quote unquote, do stupid things. But in this case, we're not talking about stupid things. We're talking about a worldwide pandemic where we have to think reasonably about how we move this forward. That being said, keep a few of these things in mind. You'll be able to see this as a PDF afterwards. Don't hesitate to go back and reference it, because all of these things will become important. Stanton, let's turn it back over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. So David, I'm actually going to come to you next. As Brian said, we are not attorneys and we're not providing legal advice, but the force majeure topic does come up in nearly every conversation that we're having with our clients. So talk to us about how you're talking to your clients around this topic.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And yeah, thanks for the disclaimer. I was going to make sure I said that as well. This will be a layman's discussion on force majeure. And you can go to the next slide if you want, Stan or Brian. There you go. All right. Yeah. So, so force majeure. So this is a term that you know, many of you may not have you know, even said those words weeks ago, but it's being floated around quite a bit these days. It's a scary term. It's basically, you know, an act of God, acts of war, things like that that would cause a provider to come to you and say, "There's just no possible way I can do this because of things that were outside of my control." So we need to invoke force majeure and get some relief. And you really don't need to do that. Kind of consistent with what Brian was talking about earlier with the data breaches. It's there contractually. I mean, it's a very structured legal action. It takes a long time to get through. There's notification periods, all this sort of thing that really doesn't help you solve the problem that you have today, right? So, I mean, our practical advice is this is collaborative cooperation, right? I mean, we're all trying to work through this together, figure out the best ways to get through what's been thrown at all of us. So there's really no need at this point from an operational perspective to invoke those kinds of heavy, onerous legal type actions that would require arbitration, require, you know, many months of litigation. So we really don't want to go there. But with that being said, there are plenty of things you can do to selectively provide relief in areas, because what you want to have happen is you want your provider to be expending all their resources on trying to solve your delivery issues and making sure that you can take care of your business and your customers as much as normal as possible. So, you know, really you think through just having those constructive conversations with them on the waivers, on the data breaches, on, you know, a myriad of issues, things that you could have in your back pocket that, you know, just think through where could you give them a little relief if they need some relief, or if they're staying up at night worrying that, you know, you're getting ready to sue them because they're not delivering to the letter of the law of the contract. I mean, you can certainly talk to them about things like, you know, maybe a temporary relief on some service levels. Maybe there's some service levels that are there that makes perfect sense in normal course of events, but with these extraordinary circumstances, you know, if something's at 99.8% instead of 99.9%, you know, maybe all things considered, that's fantastic, right? So, so just think through some of the areas like that where you could give them some relief. You could almost like the olive branch of, hey, you know, we are partners. We're trying to think through how do we make this, you know, less onerous? How do we, you know, just encourage you to keep doing the right thing and keep our interests at heart? There may be some other contractual deliverables or obligations that are in there, you know, some kind of structured reporting, some kind of, you know, meetings or extraneous reports, things like that really, with what's going on right now, maybe aren't as important. So, you know, if they miss a quarterly due date, are you going to ding them for it? Well, no, you can probably talk through that and give them some relief on that. Um, so let's see, just anything else that would come to mind would be really just around if you're thinking through kind of an approach for how to get through some of this, again, without invoking, legal actions. It's almost, you can consider this like the ultimate SEB 1, right? So you probably have an incident management process, problem management process. It's almost that kind of a structure. Maybe with some different timeframes, but it's getting, all the key players together, working through, what's wrong, what are some potential options, what are some workarounds, what are things that get us as close back to normal as possible. So, again, so we've hammered the point a couple of times. I'll say it again. This really isn't the time, for legal positioning to try to get done what you think needs to get done. That's just not a real practical approach in a very short period of time like we have right now. Again, not being a lawyer, not telling you you might not want to go down that path at some point or start thinking about some actions, but that's probably not the topic of the day. Brian, anything you would add?
No, David, I think you covered it. And I think that's really the rule of thumb for all of us is we just want to make sure that everybody works as a partner. And we know that's really easy to say, and every client we talk to says, but I want a partner. Well, now's the time to really action that. Make this your partner, work together to get to the solution.
Yeah, and I would say it's important to treat them like a partner, right?
Yeah.
They're trying to do the best they can as well. Yeah.
Okay, David. So I'm gonna close out with you. So you talked about kind of getting the key players all together. So I think one of our pieces of guidance is really around sort of engaging your business leaders and not just staying focused just on the procurement and vendor management organization, because they're knee deep in this crisis, but also bringing in those key business leaders that are either consumers or impacted by potential service disruption. So talk about why we think that's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think probably the key thing is just the speed that's required, right? So, yesterday you had a typical process for how you managed your provider community, how you managed, deliverables, expectations, SLA reporting, those kinds of things, how you requested services. That's all kind of changed in the moment. And in order to make some of the key decisions that may be necessary in a short period of time, it makes a lot of sense to get your key, we say business leaders, but it's really, I would say, anybody you consider your own internal customer, getting those folks engaged, getting them aligned, getting them positioned, if need be, to line up with some senior executive positions on the provider side to try to cut through some of the noise, try to make some quick decisions. Let's call it good. Let's call it good enough. Things that your day-to-day process probably isn't structured to handle that kind of ambiguity. So it's important to think through who are those key players on your side that you ought to be getting engaged with now, describing what the potential concerns or issues are, kind of getting your point of view together, and then going to the provider to try to get some of those things rectified as quickly as possible, and to get their executive commitment as well, that they're not going to make a lot of noise and put a lot of roadblocks in front of you to doing the things that you're trying to do. So again, just the whole vendor management, contract management, all those things, they're good. They just might not be equipped to execute a very accelerated process with the level of ambiguity that may need to be actioned at the moment. So just think through who you would need to talk to within your organization, how you kind of get everyone on the same page, and then figure out who those touch points are on the provider side to try to get those things actioned and closed out as quickly as possible.
The other
Brian,
thing I'm
anything
going
else?
to throw out, the other thing I'm going to throw out here is we are seeing some providers ask for waivers, and I'm going to walk through two of them if you're okay with that, David.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so two that we've received, which we've been asked to weigh in on, and again, we're not attorneys, but I think it's important that we think through these. So one of the providers asked a client that, as you can appreciate, the work from home plan will necessitate and or necessarily differ from our approved work locations and or networking and privacy, delivery locations, or security-related measures as approved. And what they wanted to do was eliminate the word privacy. Our immediate response to that was, we aren't attorneys, but if you give up data privacy, you're opening yourself up to a lot of different potential things. So talk through this with your provider, understand what it is exactly that they're trying to do by eliminating that word privacy and replacing it with delivery, and what the impact is for you. And again, this goes back to the fact that your business leaders have to be able to weigh in on that and determine whether or not that's a viable risk they're willing to take. The other one that we saw is, and I talked about this earlier when I was talking about comparable security. Again, the provider was not trying to do anything malicious here. What they were trying to do was recognize the fact that these people that had been working in a Citrix environment were now not going to be able to work exactly the same way. Our advice to our client was, get with your business, get with your legal counsel, and understand exactly what it is the provider's trying to do. At a very high level, we didn't think it was bad, but we didn't want the client to get hurt in the long run. David, I kind of interrupted you. Anything else there?
No, that was a great add-on. Thank you.
Okay, very good.
Okay, guys. So let's jump into, we've got a number of questions coming in. So I'm just going to start at the top here. So first question, Brian, I'll have you start us and then David can jump in. So the question is around service levels to begin with. So what's kind of the immediate impact around, are you seeing service levels being impacted with your clients? And then the second part of the question is, should clients be considering nearshore as an option to potentially de-risk the situation in India?
So I'll jump in to begin with, and then by all means let David jump in. So what we are seeing is, and we didn't see this the first 2 weeks, but we're starting to see it now, where SLAs are being impacted due to the time of response. It's taking a lot longer to get the initial response to an open ticket. SEV 1s don't seem to be impacted, but SEV 2, 3, and 4 seem to be impacted more than anything. Will that change? Yes, we believe that'll start to get better again. It's an opportunity now for the providers to adjust. There's no way, just as you as the client started your work from home journey, the providers are now having to do the same thing. And once they get it under their belt after the first couple of weeks, it'll start to climb again and things will start to get better and turn around. As far as the B part of the question, shall we consider nearshore to de-risk? Of course, I see the question came in from one of our nearshore providers as well. And the nearshore opportunity is, of course, there, but it really doesn't change the COVID-19 scenario. Whether they're nearshore, offshore, Central Europe, it really doesn't matter. They're all facing the same things, and that is that they have to work from home. Not sure that nearshoring is going to de-risk it enough.
And Brian, I would also say, so you mentioned the impact that we've seen on the incident response. I think the good news is, at least the clients that I'm aware of, it hasn't really impacted incident resolution yet. So So it appears that it's, probably some of the upfront, the initial contact and getting it routed the right way might be some of the issue. But once they get it in the right hands, it seems like for the most part, they're still able to get issues resolved. So we'll be keeping an eye on that, though.
Okay, guys, let's go to the next question. So this is around what advice can you give clients regarding how to best address the financial impact of work from home waivers? So the question is, since both parties are impacted, should the discussion be around fees or cost sharing? And then the second part of the question is, should this get addressed before the waiver is executed or after?
So again, to the point that David and I have made throughout this discussion today, this is about getting your business up and running. So if you determine that a work from home waiver is appropriate, then get the waiver in place and get the right legal language around it. You can always go back and fix the financials next week. Our recommendation is get the work moving, get the work done so your business doesn't suffer. Now, to answer that a little more fully, there are all sorts of remedies. It can be a fee reduction. It can be a potential fee increase. It could be cost sharing, considering this is a pandemic. Maybe you as a business determine to share the cost with your provider. All of those things are available and viable. The reality is it's most important to get the rapid response done, get the business up and running, worry about the potential cost impact next week.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Brian. I would say it's almost like just assume that there's going to be, a bunch of debits and credits on the ledger on both sides through this period. And at some point when things return to some level of normal, then that's the right time to have the conversation of, how does all that play out? Is there a need to make another party whole? How do we do that? But I don't think you want to get gummed up in those conversations now and let that be a roadblock to not getting your problem solved.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay, guys. Next question. So this one looks like it's around force majeure. So we have a force majeure clause that covers pandemic, and we're far enough along in our agreement that we can get out without penalty. The provider does have to help them with transition assistance. So the question is, why wouldn't they invoke that clause now and change to a new provider?
Whoa.
Go for it, Brian.
Okay. Wow, that's a toughie. Okay, so I'll take first stab at it. So if your relationship with the provider isn't that great anyways and you're thinking about changing, now is probably not the time to do that. It may look like it's the ideal time because you do have a pandemic clause and you want to go execute on that. But the reality is, just because you have signed up for transition assistance and your provider did as well, depending on how long this lasts, they're still going to have to do that stuff all remotely. And to engage a new provider, don't get me wrong, ISG would love the work. But to engage a new provider at this point is going to be difficult at best. Our advice to you would be that would be a tough one to execute.
Yeah, I would say just think through what it took to do the initial transition to that provider way back when. It's, basically you just have to hit rewind and undo all that. And it's, a similar level of effort to get out of it. And then you basically have to replay it again to transition to a new provider. Very simplistically, but yeah, that's a lot to take on. So I would not recommend that unless there was some kind of extraordinary circumstance that I can't even envision.
Right. Yep.
Okay. Next question, guys, is around getting help with call center setup for work to be able to enable folks to work from home. Sort of the cost around doing that versus doing nothing. What advice would you provide?
Okay, so I'll jump on this one too. I don't want it to sound salesy by any stretch, but there are opportunities and options out there that we as ISG can offer to our clients around the work from home capability. We can set up work from home call centers within 48 hours, and I know that seems unrealistic, but we really can. But we have to take into account the fact that you also have to have all the other things we already talked about. You have to have work from home waivers in place. You have to have the ability to have good connectivity into those people's homes. You have to have all of those things in a row and all the ducks in order to be able to execute on it. What I would say to you is if your business is dependent on those call centers and the fact that they need to operate, then by all means, spend the money up front and get those call centers set up and make sure that you can get the business back up and running. And similar to the other question we fielded, which was worry about the cost later. I can tell you right now, it's not that expensive to set up work from home call centers in comparison to the grand scheme of things. So those opportunities exist. It's not a huge dollar amount out of pocket, and it can get you over the hump.
Okay, guys. We've got one more question, and this is around, in the spirit of partnership you mentioned, should we just freeze all of our service levels and not hold the provider accountable right now?
David,
so
this one's yours. It's got your name on it.
Yeah. I would say, I mean, you could do that, certainly. I don't know that there's a need to do that. I think, one approach might be, we're still in the middle of March, right? So typically your SLA reporting is on a monthly basis. So you don't even really know what the numbers are going to look like. I mean, you can expect that there's dips here and there, but you don't really know. And then I would say if you've got, a strong governance around your SLAs, it may be more around, granting the exceptions that occur and just managing that part of it as more of a normal type process. Unless your whole dashboard goes red, then maybe you're having a different discussion. But if it's just a few that are affected, maybe through that structure is where you determine, okay, we'll grant an exception. We're likely to see this scenario again next month, so let's think about how to handle it. And I would manage it that way.
Okay, guys. We had one more question come in. Sorry, I was trying to read it there. So do we see any particular IT or BPO services that are seeing more disruption, or maybe even particular regions that are seeing disruptions from either your perspective as you're working with your clients?
That's a really interesting question. So what I will say is the more human-dependent things are requiring, we're seeing a little more potential failure positions. So I think about BPO in particular. We think about F&A BPO. We think about HR BPO. We think about procurement BPO opportunities. Those are the ones that we're seeing at my clients in particular, so I can only speak to my clients. They're the ones where we're seeing there's a struggle. And it's because so much of that opportunity is bent on human interactions. Think about accounts receivable and accounts payable, and if that provider has not automated a lot of those efforts, those things are the ones that are going to suffer. And that's what I'm seeing at a couple of my clients. That does not mean that's overall, but that's what I'm personally seeing at a couple of my clients.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Okay, so we really, really appreciate everyone taking the time. As we said when we kick things off, we understand how busy you are and the fact that you invested this time with us. We're incredibly grateful for it. We encourage you to keep an eye on ISG's website and our social media handles so If you've been there, you've seen that we're continuing to publish quite a bit of guidance around this topic, from everything that we talked about this week to the topics we talked around last week, which were sort of bigger picture, 5 steps to take immediately. Next week, we're going to be talking around some areas around immediate cost reduction and cost takeout that we're going to be recommending our clients look at. So we really appreciate your time, and we hope that you stay safe. So Jillian, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Stanton. Thanks, everyone. This does conclude our time today. We appreciate you joining this ISG Smart Talk. As mentioned, the recording of this webinar will be available to share with your colleagues at the same link as this live event. If you'd like to speak with Stanton, Brian, David, or any of our ISG advisors, please reach out to us at www.isg-one.com. Thanks very much for listening.